Welcome to this short lecture. My name's Dr. Andy Kirkland, and I'm a panel member of the General University Ethics Panel and have delegated authority for signing off all ethical forms for students in the faculty. Now, I'm going to spend around 10 to 15 minutes going through the basics prior to you going to your ethics seminar on Friday. So, without further ado. Right, so there are two aims today. Firstly, I want to highlight the importance of the ethics process and then help you navigate it as effectively as possible without causing too much work for yourself, your supervisor, or for me. So it's in everyone's interest that you do really well throughout the ethics process. Now, the ethical process is a vital part of your project, which you'll have to go through if you're having any contact with living creatures. Now, ethics is a really important subject covered by, I think, the Declaration of Helsinki. And it's really to safeguard your participants or subjects to make sure that what you do is respectful to them and in their best interests. It's also a process to safeguard you. We recognise that this is probably your first ever research project where you're going out into the big bad world and doing something independently, and it's a very challenging process to go through your final year project. So we want to safeguard you to make sure things don't go wrong. And finally, we want to safeguard the university. So if, for example, if your supervisor or I don't follow due process and you get something wrong and someone gets hurt or harm occurs, then there could be wider legal implications for the university. So a half-hearted approach won't do. Ethics is probably the most important part of your final year project. It's really easy not to put your all into it when it's not assigned a grade or a mark. However, your ethics is assessed, probably more assessed than any other piece of work that you'll do at the university. Firstly, it will be reviewed by your supervisor and then by the delegated authority of GUEP, which is likely to be me. I can guarantee you that it'll be forensic, and if you go through a half-hearted approach, you probably have to do the form again. Right, now you'll find a decision tree on the GUEP form, but I'll try and simplify the process for you. So, the only circumstance where you don't need to go through the ethics process if you're doing a systematic review. So if you're doing a systematic review, i.e. a book study, sitting in front of your computer with Google Scholar and the university search engine, going through a systematic review, then you don't need to fill out the ethics form. As penance, though, you still need to come to the ethics seminar because it's compulsory. Next stage, if your study is invasive, you want to work in a challenging area like mental health, drugs, it involves working on NHS property, or it's more sport science research in nature, and or your project involves the remit of a different ethics committee in the university, i.e. it's not really a social sciences type project, then what I suggest you do is change your mind. If you're pig-headed like me, then I advise. And so if you're pig-headed like me and you want to continue with your idea, then I advise that you arrange a chat with your supervisor or me at your earliest convenience. And what we'll do is attempt to help you change your mind anyway. If you refuse and continue to be pig-headed, and I applaud that because I like people to be challenging and go for what they really want to go for, then your life will become infinitely more challenging. You'll go through processes beyond the faculty, there'll be delays in the processes, and you'll need to wait for formal sittings of the ethics panel and so on. Now, me and your supervisor will continue to be nice to you, but, well, just saying, you probably want to keep your study as straightforward and uncontroversial as possible. So, if it's uncontroversial, non-invasive, doesn't involve NHS property and all these different things, then you need to complete the GUEP ethics form and associated forms too. So I would probably miss out the first 4 boxes and just say to you, complete the GUEP ethics form. Bottom line is that you need to complete the appropriate forms that are on the university website on ethics. This submission will always include the GUEP form. It will include an informed consent and/or information sheet too. And if you're doing a face-to-face study, i.e. fieldwork, then we'll need a risk assessment form completed too. Now, these forms will go to your supervisor firstly to sign off. That may take some toing and froing until it reaches a standard that they're happy with. And then all those forms will be submitted to me to review. And I'll comment on them. And either sign them off. I may ask for minor amendments, I may ask for major amendments, and we'll go through that process until both I and your supervisor are satisfied that you've hit the appropriate standard, or you go back to stage 1 and you will be answering, are you doing a systematic review? Yes, you don't need to do ethics. So basically, if you don't pass ethics, you will be doing a systematic review. Right, there's many grey areas in research ethics in which you may ask 100 different lecturers the same question and get 200 different answers. What really counts is getting sign-off from your supervisor and from the delegated authority. What's important to realise is that your supervisor may say that your application is fine, however, the delegated authority may disagree. Therefore, you may well be getting your application back, even several times before you're allowed to start data collection. Doing half a job will inevitably lead to double the work or more for yourself. Don't attempt to take any shortcuts, as they'll be spotted. As I say, we are forensic. You, your supervisor, and I are all legally accountable if due process is not followed and something or someone is harmed as a result. It's important to recognise that ethics is often confusing, bewildering, unclear and perplexing, and that's just for me. So there's many grey areas in ethics, and it's the first time that you're going through that process, and you may find it really frustrating and get annoyed with it. That's normal. Your supervisors, me, and lots of other academic staff need to go through this process when we're doing research studies ourselves, and I assure you we do more research studies than you guys, and sometimes we're faced with the same levels of confusion, bewilderment, we're unclear and totally perplexed, and we're asked to do extra things by the GUIP committee that doesn't really make us happy. So it's important to recognize that you're going through quite a challenging part of your project. So remember what I said, doing half a job will inevitably lead to double the work and plenty of frustration. Putting 100% into it, working hard, doesn't necessarily guarantee initial success, but it'll save you an awful lot of work as a result. It's really worth doing your homework, even if it's an hour's reading. The British Psychological Society Code of Ethics and Conduct is a really good starting point, in which it would be good, even if you thought, this is really boring, I'd really advise you spend 20 minutes going through that, and that you get to grips with these 4 principles within the document of respect, competence, responsibility, and integrity. When I'm reviewing your form, so from my perspective, I'm looking to see that your research question or questions have been carefully considered, and your methods, including methods of analyses, are appropriate to answer your question. Being able to demonstrate this shows me that you're unlikely to waste your participants' time, thus demonstrating due respect, competence, and responsibility and integrity, firstly to your participants, and secondly to the research process. There's plenty of information on the university website too. I would say read all of that too, but my guess is that you won't, and that's fine, as long as you understand everything on the boxes on your forms, and that you consider these 4 principles. Just to reiterate, respect, competence, responsibility, and integrity. Right, we're nearly there. So, working with schools and children. We get an awful lot of questions about working with schools and children. And again, thinking back to the zebra picture, there are no hard and fast rules here on permissions. Working with schools and children can be complicated, but also highly rewarding. So we wouldn't discourage, in fact, some people might discourage you from doing it, but I won't discourage you from working with schools or children. That is because it is highly rewarding and can be really meaningful. However, if you wish to work in a school environment, the head teacher should be your first port of call. They may be able to provide you with permission to conduct a study within the school with the students, but it may be the policy of the local authority that you require permission from the local authority. The head teacher will tell you if that is the case. Additionally, you may need parental permission too. That depends on what delegated authority the head teacher has. So again, it's impossible to say what would happen. It is highly dependent on the context and the school and the children you may be working with. Whilst you may not have those permissions in place in time for submitting your ethics form, I would expect to see a statement on how you intend to get permission, and this should be included on your ethics form. You must show your supervisor that you have permission before starting data collection. You may also want to work with children in school, in after-school clubs, in sports clubs, in local authority centres, or you may be a volunteer on some program or other that you want to involve children. Now, you probably heard about PVG checks. It's a check you go through when working with children or vulnerable groups. However, like ethics, PVG checks involve plenty of grey areas. Different organisations will interpret legislation differently. And my interpretation is that you do not necessarily need a PVG check unless you are working with individuals or groups on an ongoing basis, that you'll have face-to-face contact with them too. So you don't need my interpretation is you don't need a PVG check when doing a remote survey with children. What I would say though is if you're conducting focus groups, doing observations, interviews, anything like that which involves face-to-face contact with children, then you should also always do so with another adult present, and you should always have permission if you're using any sort of video or sound recording equipment too. And you should highlight that what your processes are on obtaining that permission on your ethics form. If you're in any doubt, ask your supervisor or me. Don't just go away and do what you think, because it could leave you open to safeguarding issues. So just make sure you follow the process of speaking to me or your supervisor. Nearly. Right, thankfully we're on to the final slide. Expectations of completing the form. Now, no one likes completing forms. Well, not unless you're aware told. But let's look on the bright side. It's easier than completing a universal credits or immigration form, and the consequences for getting it wrong are not so bad as losing the roof over your head, not being able to eat, or being deported. So I would still remember to fill in every box though. The consequences is you'll get the form back to fill in again, and there might be some delays. But try and get it right first time. And before you submit it to your supervisor to check, triple check it and reread all the boxes yourself to make sure you've not missed anything. There is some overlap in the form, which I believe is currently being addressed. So that's the good news, that we're trying to sort out the form and make it nice and clear. The bad news is it won't be done in time for when you'll be filling it in. So you've got what you've got. So in the meantime, please feel free to cross-reference boxes throughout the form and try not repeat yourself. So if you've given some information in the project description box, say on your methods, and ask for them again in another box, just cross-reference back to your project description. Ideally, this description should look like an abstract without the results in discussion in it. If it does have the results in discussion, then you're in the doghouse because you've conducted a study without ethics. What I would expect to see is a clear introduction to your study, i.e. what it's about, including key definitions, your aims and objectives, the theoretical framework you're using, and most importantly, why your question is worth asking, i.e. what's the gap in the literature, or is it a problem within a context that you think is really important to be solving a problem within. Just be really clear on these factors. So introduction to the study, including definitions, aims, objectives, your theoretical framework, and why your question is worth asking. The next thing is to give careful description of your methods, including who your participants are, how you will recruit them, the likely sample size. By this stage, you should know sample size is how many people that you intend to recruit for the study, and be very, very realistic. I often comment on that when I'm reviewing ethics forms. Is it actually possible that you're able to recruit who you say you'll recruit? Bear in mind that, or I would say in the studies that I've gone for, anything between, so if the population is 50 people, and you want to contact those 50 people, the likelihood is about 10 to 15% of them will respond. Yeah, so you'll only have about 7 or 8 research participants. So keep that in mind in your recruitment processes, that recruitment is really, really challenging, and a response rate, say for questionnaires and stuff, will typically be between anything from 5% through to about 35%. If you get above 35%, then you've done awesomely well. So keep that in mind. I want to know if you're using interviews, questionnaires, or some type of test. You should also carefully consider your methods of analyses, i.e. how are you going to analyze your data? Have you provided any references for how you're going to code interview data, for example? So I would say Braun and Clark is the most commonly cited method to do so. But I would like to see due consideration of how you're going to analyze the data, whether you're using statistical tests, what those tests are, because that impacts on what statistical test you're likely to use will impact on how you collect your data. So you need to know that before you start collecting your data. Or if you're doing interviews or questionnaires, how are you going to code up your responses? I would like to, ideally, to have a description of how you're going to do so. Preferably, I would also like to see interview guides or questionnaires attached to your ethics application. That's the absolute ideal. However, that's not always possible. You may change your mind at the last moment or not be quite there on getting those questions done. But your research supervisor must see and sign these off using an auditable trail before you commence data collection. It's your responsibility to ensure this is done too. Confidentiality and GDPR is a grey area covering a minefield, so it's hard to navigate to. Universities and organizations are trying to work out what the legislation means to them. So it's kind of like the ethics process as a whole. You'll get multiple different types of answer to the same questions, and it's quite difficult to navigate GDPR effectively. To do so, though, be absolutely clear on how you will maintain confidentiality of your participants. If you can't do so, then that's fine, but you must clearly articulate in your information forms and consent forms that you can't guarantee confidentiality, and that should be very clear to your participants. Remember, you should attach information forms and consent forms. It's okay not to have a physical form, so it might be an online form which won't be signed in ink. Just be absolutely clear of the process in which consent will be given and articulate that really, really well. There's so many permutations that giving you draft paragraphs of how to write about GDPR and what processes you follow isn't feasible, really. Also, by asking others, doing internet searches, and trying to work it out for yourself will result in more effective learning, even though it might be more painful than a statistics lecture. Right, anyway, thanks very much for listening. If you've got any questions, please save them for the seminar. And if there's anything your supervisor can't answer, I'm sure they'll write them down and then send them a list to me, and I'll do my very best to do a group response on the most common ethics questions. And if you're still stuck, get in touch. You can Google, so you'll be able to find me on the university website. So thanks for listening, and I'm out of here.